Let's hope we don't, mic on? Let's hope we don't have any problem with technology or anybody falling over for that matter. So good morning. I've come all the way from Australia to join you here today. We're not going to talk about cricket, we're going to talk about, and we're not even going to talk about technology actually. We're going to talk about being open and we're going to talk about data. Two topics I know a little bit about. So let me just get to my slides. That's me, by the way. I look much younger there, don't I? It was only taken last week. So what I want to talk about is this notion of openness, right? When we think about a lot of the problems we have with technology, we try and solve technology with technology. We try and solve technology with software, right? And yes, we've architected a great piece of software here. And yes, right, we've got some, we've got this no code sort of integration into how we bring workers into this process and therefore expand the pool of people that can help solve this work execution gap. But there are two other things that we also need to do if we're going to close this work execution gap. The first is we've got to be truly open, right? Truly open to making ourselves more vulnerable, sharing our data. No one likes to share data, right? No one likes to share data. But if we don't share data, we're not going to solve this problem. And I'll explain a little bit about that, right? I'm also going to talk about, then when we talk about this openness too, right, we've got to think about 100% interoperability. If you think about the intelligent automation industry today, it's exactly that. It's exactly not that. There's no interoperability almost. We have these islands of technology out there. So I'm going to talk about those. And I love this sort of little analogy here. So the Oxford Dictionary defines open as allowing things or people to go through. So that's exactly what the intelligent automation industry is not, right? It is blocked and it is closed. And so what I'm asking you to do is to try and take your technology hat off for a moment, which we've just gone through, and really come in with an open mindset to think about how we're going to crack this egg open. Because this is a big problem. And I want to start off with thinking about let's use history as a means to maybe inform us a little bit and give us some insights. So let's talk about the open software industry. So there was a problem in the open software industry, the open source. It was the software execution gap. We were stuck with these legacy IBM mainframe systems, using very, old types of code. There was no much innovation taking place. There was no collaboration taking place. And we had this company called Red Hat that came out and, brought its Linux software out. And suddenly, right, we saw this boom, this explosion, right, of software that took place, right? And it was driven around the principle of being open. Right? There's some things that we can learn from that. Flexibility is something that we can learn from it, right? No vendor lock-in is a core principle, right, of the Open Software Foundation. And I think that's something that we can think about as we try and solve the work execution gap. And obviously open collaboration. But it's not just the software industry. Think about other industries that have had exponential growth recently. So let's think about sort of the electric vehicle car, the EV industry, right? So Elon Musk did two pretty extraordinary things in terms of opening his business up. Anybody know what they were? What did he do? Someone, I'm trying to make this interactive. Go ahead.
He opened the patent.
He opened the patent, yeah. And he did something more recently. What did he do?
He bought Twitter.
yeah. He did that. And he's fired the CEO and he's fired the CFO very quickly. So I hope he doesn't buy later because I'll be in a lot of trouble then. No. But the other thing he did is he's opened up the charging stations to everybody, right, to his competitors, right? Because he's trying to raise the tide. He knows that for him to be successful, for his company to be successful, right, all of his competitors or many of his competitors also need to be successful. And so I think there's a lot that we can learn from other industries around opening up and being collaborative, right, rather than how we sort of, process it today. So we've created a definition, if my pointer works. Okay, apparently I have, oh no, okay. I almost know this definition off by heart, so I could have almost done it. But so the WES open ecosystem, what is it? It's based on thousands. It may be based on tens of thousands. It'll eventually be based on millions of companies that had an innovative mindset, who are prepared to think beyond just their own specific requirements and recognise that they're going to be part of a movement to try and solve this work execution gap. It's based on 100% connectivity. 100% connectivity. And I'll make some announcements a little bit later on about how we're going to do that ourselves. It's based on freedom. It's based on ideation. It's based on new business models. Forget the idea of standard subscription software. It won't be in the work execution system in many years to come because it's not about closing the gap. It's about selling software. And how many of you have bought software that hasn't closed the gaps or solved the problems and you're stuck with that software? Right? It's not about that. It's about new business models. It's about innovation. I'm going to share a couple of those with you a bit later on. And it's about this, right? In fact, the stuff that Ronan spoke about, there was $17 trillion worth of work that was identified by McKinsey, but 2.3 trillion of it is no one wants to do. Now do your maths on that, right? So how big is the RPA TAM today? Frank, how big is the RPA TAM?
Gee, thanks. I couldn't tell you the current number because I don't do RPA anymore.
Okay, right, then I won't ask you. So let's just call it somewhere between, say, $2 and $8 billion. Would that be a reasonable range?
Closer to 8.
Closer to 8. But the 2's better for me because it makes better for what I'm about to say next. Can we stick with 2?
Yes.
Okay, we'll stick with 2. All right, so if it is 2, and I know that we're playing a little bit on numbers here, all right, that's 1,000 times the size of the problem and 1,000 times the size of the opportunity that we're dealing with here. So this is enormous what we're talking about here, this total economic opportunity. So that is why it can't be just technology. It's got to be a movement, right? It's got to be a group, a large group of people wanting to work together. When we think about our, when we think about our community-led ecosystem, right, it starts with the platform itself, right? Clearly, we've got to have a platform that can orchestrate all the different technologies that we want, right? But it's not just about having better software or new architecture software, as I said. Yeah, that's not what it's about, right? The ecosystem needs a community approach to the creation of new work IP. So that could be free software, right? That could be premium software. That could be software provided in completely different business models. I predict, who was here when the board and the cloud partners sort of came about? Come on, a few of you are as old as me. Born in the cloud, right? So what really drove the born in the cloud partners? It was the advent of the cloud, right? And suddenly you had all these new, right, quite innovative, younger, right, entrepreneurs starting their own businesses. Well, I think we're going to see the same thing again. We're going to see these work entrepreneurs, people that have the domain expertise in the areas in which they work, they know their work, and they're now going to go out and move from, and Ronan showed it in the blueprint, trainer, manager, owner, right? And you're going to start to see all these different sort of new approaches. So I think there's going to be a whole host of new business models. And of course, as each one said, it's got to be sold somewhere. So, we're going to have our own workforce market. I'll talk a little bit more about how that comes together. So the core principle starts with community-led. It's the community IP in the middle. It's not about us creating the IP, right? It's about the community creating the IP. Think about open source software again. Who created the IP? It was community-led. So if we look at about our ecosystem, as I said, it's not just about replace. I want to make this point really, really clear. All right? This is not about replacing human work with digital work. Where I come from, right? So I come from as far away as you can get from London. I'm from Melbourne in Australia, so that's about 21 hours on a flight if anyone wants to join me on the way home, right? Where I come from, we have 700,000 jobs we can't fill. There's nobody available to fill those jobs, right? So it can't be about replacing it. It's about putting the digital and the human worker in the middle, and it's about addressing what I call that fractured relationship. Human workers fear, right, digital workers. The narrative out there is digital workers take my job. Right? In reality, we need to let people do what they're good at, and we've talked a lot about that. Somi talked about some of the things that humans want to do, those 4 things that she had later in a slide. Human workers are no longer just doers of boring tasks. As we said earlier on, they're trainers, they're managers, they're creators, right? And we empower them, right, We should be empowering them to go out and buy their own digital workers, go to the marketplaces that we're talking about, right? And being able to buy their digital. The same way you hire a person, you hire a human employee. Why can't you hire a digital worker? We're going to move into a utility model, right? You will be hiring digital workers in the same way. You'll go through employment agencies, literally, potentially, right, to be able to hire some of your digital workers. So the ecosystem, though, has a lot of parts to it. This is not solved by just, a simple, what I call the enterprise, so the vendor and the customer and the channel partner relationship, right? There's a lot more that we need to do this, right? So there's work interoperability. I'll talk a bit more about it, but this is about 100% open APIs. 100% open APIs. Work services is around all the different types of services partners, including things like data partners, including things like, I don't know if you know this, but there's tens of millions of people out there that tag unstructured data and convert that to structured data. But to be able to access that is exceptionally difficult. So that needs to come into the open ecosystem. I'll talk about work mining, but I want you to think about this. Don't start with the process, start with the human. Don't start with the process, start with the human. I'll talk about that. Work IP. Imagine now that you're buying your HubSpot software, and with your software, you're buying a digital worker that'll do your nurture emails for you. So you're buying that directly from HubSpot. Right? That's what I'm talking about when I talk about IP. Work infrastructure, we're already working with most of the major hyperscale vendors and cloud vendors already. They're part of it. Work operations, your BPOs and your gig workers and the platforms they use, they need to be part of it. And I'm going to spend a little bit of time talking about work community because, as I said, this is not just a commercial problem between all of us. This is government and other institutions that need to be part of solving this problem. So let me begin with this notion of interoperability. 100% interoperability. So think what Red Hat did, think about what others have done. So there's two really important points I want to make on this slide. Two. The first is, this means, right, your existing intelligent automation investments that you've made that may not be optimized in the way that you want, right, you keep them, right, whether they be chat or IDP, RPA or any other form of technology, right. I'll say this once, and I'm going to be very clear on it. I'm a big, right, opponent of this, this tactic that you see from a lot of software vendors called rip and replace. So what I mean by rip and replace, you've got one vendor saying, my widget's better than the widget you've got already. Throw that one out and bring mine in, all right? And so our strategy is around integrate, not replace. So we're not asking any one of you, right, to throw out your RPA integrations, right? Instead, what you'll see is when you saw Yichuan's presentation and he had third party, right, that's the third party. You don't have to use our RPA. We don't care. Right? We want you to continue to use the investments that you've already made, and we want to make them work for you, right? So it's about integrate, not replace. But there's a responsibility I put on you as a group, as a customers. Legacy vendors are afraid of openness. Legacy vendors are afraid and threatened by openness. So who are they going to change it for? They're not going to change because lie comes along, are they? Right? They're not going to change it necessarily because an association's come along. What's going to get them to change? Anyone want to hazard a guess?
Customer.
Correct. Right? It has to be customer driven. There's a responsibility, right, that you as customers in this room, if you want to join this journey of closing the work execution gap, if you want to be part of it, what you've got to do is you've got to say to them, integrate. The API is there, right? We want to be able to integrate with, this particular, what we're doing here, the work execution platform or the work execution system. So I think the responsibility sits with all of us here if we're going to truly solve this, $2.3 trillion problem. Okay. It's very sensitive. My wife says I'm very sensitive too, right? I don't know where that comes from. But, so clearly, my technology is almost as sensitive as I am. Anyway, so work services, right? So there's a lot of different work services partners we need, and many of you are in this room today. So yes, we need you, the integrations, we need the co-innovators. I'm going to talk about one particular partner in a moment who's in the room. We need the data partners. We need the open source that I was talking about earlier on. We need the digital skills, and clearly, right, we've got the largest global community that we talked about, and I'm going to talk about very earlier on. But here's a message for the partners in this room that aren't on this journey. You have a choice. You can stay doing what you're doing, I argue, and be a bit disappointed potentially by some of the results, and be undifferentiated in the eyes of your customers, or you can take a risk. You can take a risk. You can join the journey, right? Join this notion of closing the work execution gap, right? You'll certainly stand out in the crowd, right? Yeah, there is a risk to it, but I tell you, if you do it right, my personal belief is that you'll profit tremendously from it, because there's a huge shortage out here. We all need this gap. So if you're a partner and you're in this room and you're not on this journey, tap me on the shoulder afterwards. I'd be very happy to have a chat to you. But we do have a lot of partners, right? So we're very fortunate that we're supported by some of the largest integrators in the world. Some of you are in this room, some of them aren't. But we've done projects with all of those up on the screen. But I want to talk about a very special partner today, one that's in the room. We have this program that we call our WES Co-Innovation Program, right? It's where a particular partner has to make a significant investment, right, and commitment, around IP, around enablement, right, around a whole host of different things. And it's a bit of a risk. And we're very pleased, right, this is an invitation-only program to say that Siklam, right, and Gaurav, where are you in the room here? There he is, right, is going to join our... Stand up, okay? So Gaurav's going to join our panel a little bit later on, right? But Siklam is right at the forefront of trying to integrate all these technologies. He understands as well as anybody, some of the challenges that he faces. And he gets, as a consequence, he and Siklam's customers get a whole host of benefits. But I want to talk about one. I'm going to ask for a show of hands here. So we have this program called the Business Results Guarantee. Does anybody know what that is? Show of hands if you know what the Business Results Guarantee is. Okay, so about maybe a quarter of the room, but I think it's mostly going to be sort of, our folks putting their hands up, I think, don't you think? All right. So what is the Business Results Guarantee? It means that if we can review the business case, the customer business case, right, and we agree with the outcomes, the expected business returns, we will sign up to the fact that we will actually do a full refund on our software, if we don't deliver those results in the agreed timeframes. Do you know anybody, other software vendors that do that? So, no, right? And so that's how committed and convinced we are. This is what I talk about new business models. Subscription models will be out, 5 years from now, they won't exist, right? It's all going to be outcome-based, right? So we have this in place. What's really pleasing is that Siklam will be our first partner, right, where we're going to actually provide this guarantee to them and to their customers, right? So now, right, if you're out there and you're buying the work execution system, the platform, right, from Siklam, right, provided by us with their services, we're going to guarantee the business results. If not, we will give you your money back. So that is really, a lot of partners, a lot of vendors out there talk the talk but don't walk the walk. We're walking the walk. And we'll do this with others as well, if you're prepared to make the level of investment that we think is needed. So we think that is very significant. We've also, we've talked a little bit about this. You've seen the figure, 750,000 developers. It's a huge community of developers that we have out there, right? It includes, as I said, it's the largest. Right, we're expanding with universities. We'll have an announcement soon with 7 very substantial global branded universities around programs we're doing with them. And we're working, and we're also going to be launching a very unique customer assurance model that will come out early next year. So the same notion of our business results guarantee. How do we remove risk for customers? Right, we're going to do something through our developer community where we're going to reduce risk for both, not just the customers, but also for the developers. But what we're going to do, and I think this is really walking the walk, right? And that is, we're going to, so this is making us vulnerable, right? Really, really vulnerable. We're going to our 750,000 developers and we're going to actively promote for them to develop on our competitive products. And you might ask why? Because if we don't set the example around openness, who will? Right? So when we first had this conversation with our executive team internally and this idea came up, what do you think the response was like? Right? Like, it was like, what are you smoking, dude? Right? Seriously, like, you can't be opening up to competitors. But that's the mindset, right? We're saying you've got to work with all technologies if you're going to close the work execution gap. So we're going to actively promote this to our developer community. So, very famous quote, that culture eats strategy. Well, I say work eats process, right? This notion of work mining is all about starting with the human first, not the process. Think about what the human worker wants to do, what the employee wants to do, not what they don't want to do. And this information is out there already. You already have these, customer experience or employee experience vendors out there. They're collecting around what they like to do, what they don't like to do, what they're good at, what they're not good at, what they want to do more of, what makes them feel more connected, what makes them feel more valued. The information's there. And so we're already in discussions with many of these types of vendors, the Qualtrics's and the Culture Amps and these sort of organisations, around using that information, and then using that to design where our starting point is. That's where our discovery process begins. It starts with the employee, not the process. That's not to say work process mining doesn't have a play here. It does have a play, but that's not where you start, right? You first start with, right, what is it, right, that we want the employee to do? And then you can build the business case around the process mining elements of it. Can you believe we were in London and it's November the 1st and the room's hot and the doors are open? Right? This doesn't happen in London too often. Extraordinary. Anyway, back to point. So my point here is this software already exists. This data out there already exists. So it needs to be part of the ecosystem. I said earlier on that this is not just about enterprises, most of the people in this room to solve. It needs a huge commitment from government and regulators, particularly those aligned with future of work or inequality of work or future education, etc. You need government, you need analysts. We have some of you in the room here today, right? And it's not just the tech analysts, it's the economic analysts. We had a press session with one of the economic analysts just recently. It's media, and for the media in the room, it's not just talking about the future of work. We've got to start talking solutions. And today we're proposing a solution, to the work execution gap. And so we asked the media to come along on this journey with us and talk about it. And in associations, whether it's digital skills or business associations or automation associations, universities, etc. It takes, there's many that have claimed this statement, but it's I don't know who actually was the original author of it, but it takes a huge village to solve this problem because it's a big problem. So that is what makes up our ecosystem. The part of our ecosystem is our commitment, right, to social impact. That's also part of what we're doing with our WS ecosystem. And there are 3 things that I want to announce today that we're going to do. The first is we commit to training another 1 million community developers on top of the 750,000 that we have. So that's 1.75 million developers. We're going to do that in 3 ways. So the first way is we're going to go into targeted countries, right? Particularly, parts of West Africa, for example, or East Europe, right? And we're going to go in and we're going to upskill some of those organisations. And that very much lines up to the Sustainable Development Goal number 4 of, the UN, which is, around quality education. The second thing we're going to do is we're going to work with universities and we're going to build it into their curriculum, not for the tech and IT guys, but for the lawyers and the accountants and the engineers and the dentists and the nurses, right? Because they're the ones that are going to start building some of the skills. So we're going to work with them. And then lastly, right, we're also going to work with some of the adult education programs. You look at, many of us have a great deal of subject matter expertise in our heads, right? And this, as a generation, we're going to be gone soon. And where's that information going to go? How's it going to reside? So we're working in a couple of different countries, right, directly with government, right, around doing exactly that, providing sort of that next generation or giving them this sort of work execution sort of education. So that's what we're doing at the workforce level. At the individual worker level, when Henry Ford, popularised the motor vehicle, one of the things he did was he came up with this notion of minimum wage. And he did it for 2 reasons, right? Because he couldn't scale his business, right, with the quality, right, and retain the type of staff that he needed. So he had this notion of minimum wage and all this sort of, he got a great workforce. It's probably unknown to many, maybe his biggest sort of, societal value that he's ever created. So we're going to do something very similar. Right, so we're going to go into some certain markets, some markets that are less advantaged than us here in the UK here today, and we're going to put in something like a minimum wage, the same notion. We're still going to make sure there's an arbitrage opportunity, for your services. Obviously you're trying to save some money, but it's not going to be at the point where they're exploited. Right, we're going to actually hard code in our system where there's a minimum wage or a minimum daily rate, right, that you can hire your workers on, right, or hire these workers. Right, because we think we need, workers from Ukraine or Congo or Brazil or wherever they may be. We need them to help solve this problem because we haven't got enough of us in the UK and Australia and other countries. So we're going to do that. And lastly, the last thing that we're going to do is we've written a white paper around how much carbon our software can save the world. Not only have we written a white paper around it, but we've actually created a carbon calculator. So I don't know if any of you have seen our carbon calculator, but when, in the same way that you do an ROI calculator when you've sort of, used someone's software, we have a carbon calculator at the same time so you can calculate it. So I talked about new business models earlier on. So one of the things that we're going to do is in the future, right, if you use our software, we can calculate how much carbon you've saved and we'll create that as like a credit against future purchases. So in other words, it's another form of discount. So the more carbon you save, the more discount you're going to get in the future. Again, this notion of new business models. Do you know any other software vendors doing anything like that? No, it's not out there. So we're taking our open ecosystem really seriously. This is not just about technology. But there's one other piece to it that I want to finish off with. I'm not going to spend a lot of time on it, but I want to talk about metadata. The other half that sort of unlocks, right? It's the open economy, the open ecosystem, and it's metadata. And I want to talk about, first of all, and you can see the definition. I'm not going to read the definition. You can see it up on the screen. And most people, when they read the definition, doesn't really know what it means. But fundamentally, what it allows you to do is it allows you to organise data into something that you can search and work with. And if we're going to solve this work execution system, we're not talking about millions of data, hundreds of millions of pieces of data, billions of pieces of data. We're talking about trillions of conversations and videos and documents and weather reports and all manner of different things that will be contributing to it. So if you can't organise that data in a way, you can't use that data. You can't search that data. So that's very much what our work metadata is about. And what I want to talk about is in our research that we did recently, it's not just that. We thought that most people weren't thinking about this big concept of looking beyond normal data. And when I say metadata, by the way, there are 2 types. Think about private and public. So private would be inside your own organisation, right? So you're using data from another process or from another system, right? But you're using that to improve your machine learning algorithms, right, of something that's already happening internally. Or alternatively, it could be external, right? It could be industry data. It could be, so think about, just think about this one idea for invoice processing. Imagine if we gave our software away for nothing, say for companies are up to say 2,000 invoices a month, gave it away for nothing. Think about how much data we would have on invoice processing, how smart the algorithms could be, and how well that could benefit you. But you can only do that because we need a different business model to get there. So this notion of public data is really important if we're going to solve this work execution gap. Oh, shoot, I got too quick on that. But anyway, what the last slide was just trying to say is it's not just us thinking about it. 2/3 of your competitors are also thinking about it. So as I start to bring this notion of work data to a close, let me tell you why this is so important, why it has to be part of the mix of the work execution system to close the gap. First of all, it needs to include all the data types. Each one's talked about that. That's the easy part. I know it's hard for most of you. That's actually the easy part, right? It also, right, we also need more data. We all know, right, that machine learning, the intelligence and the accuracy and everything else of machine learning is really driven by the data sample size. So the more data you have, go back to the invoice processing example when we've got hundreds of millions and maybe billions of invoices, in an anonymised way that's GDPR compliant. Imagine how intelligent that algorithm will be, right? And so, we have to do this because we need smarter models. We need more accurate models. Now, let me tell you the two big reasons why this is important. One is, if we do this and we have this external data, it actually allows you to benchmark. You benchmark internally, benchmark externally. How big is my gap? How does my gap compare to others? Where is my gap? What's the cause of my gap? Right? If all you're doing is you're looking at your own, sort of individual process, you can't do that because you have no context of anything else around you. You need context to be able to understand this. So it allows you to benchmark it. So you can benchmark how your SLAs are going against someone else's SLAs, etc. But here's the exciting part. Here's the really, really exciting part. It allows you to scale in ways never seen before because now, because it's AI native, right, not only can you measure the gap, but you can close the gap with technology. So suddenly, you've got an algorithm that's going out there, not only identifying the gap for you, but automatically auto-solving it for you. No human involvement at all. Right? Now, I know that's a real aspiration, but unless we collect the data, that aspiration will never become a reality. So in closing, I want you to think about this. I've talked about open, and I've talked about work metadata. I've not talked really about software. Have I talked software once? No. Right? So software is important, but not alone. If you're not open, you're not going to, what will happen is you'll keep going rip and replace. You're not going to protect your own investment. If you're not open, right, or if you are open, you're going to have a lot more options available to you to help solve this problem, and there's no vendor lock-in. Right? There's no vendor lock-in for us. We encourage you to use the software you've got. You can swap out our software at any stage for something else through this process. On the work metadata front, right, it gives you agility, right? Processes change, governments change, environments change. Government changes here quite a lot, or the Prime Minister at least. That was a really bad joke, I apologise. Right? That's probably very politically insensitive. But correct, yes. So it gives you agility, it gives you speed, it gives you accuracy, and most importantly, it gives you performance. So with that, I encourage you to join us on this journey, this path to close the work execution gap, right? Be a pioneer, right? Be part of something that is possibly the biggest problem facing the globe today. Not only that, but also within your own businesses as well. Thank you very much.